Can you give us a 30-second introduction of yourself and what you do?
So I'm Andrew. I am now a retired entrepreneur, but I've been on this crazy journey for the last 12 years or so, where when I was 27, I started a business from my bedroom called Pareto, and we grew it to about 50 million turnover and about 500 staff. Had this epic growth journey during that time. Very fortunately, I managed to exit in 2023. We raised about $100 million for the business, and I retired a couple of years ago. I now live on a farm in Oxfordshire and mainly spend time doing podcasts and spending time with my kids and rebuilding some of the relationships that I lost over the last 10 years of growing a business. So yeah, that's where you find me today.
Amazing. And traveling around Norway, of course, getting lost.
And traveling, most of Europe. I think I've only got 4 countries left in the EU now, which I'm trying to hit next year. But I'm going to end in Liechtenstein because, there's very rarely does one find themselves in Liechtenstein. So I thought it'd be a great place to finish. So
sounds amazing. So you've spoken quite a lot on other podcasts about growing up on a council estate and eventually going on to sell your company for 100 million.
Yeah.
Can you take us back to your upbringing? Like, what kind of values and work ethics shaped you as a child?
Yeah, and some people don't like talking about being working class, but for me, it's something that really shaped me as the person that I am, and it really led to a great success for us in business. So my family in 1950 something, my nan and gramp moved on to the Northway Council Estate in Oxford in a caravan. So they didn't even have a council house to start off with. They lived in a caravan to begin with, and they had my mum and my 2 aunties in that caravan, and then eventually moved into a council house. And in the 70s, my grandfather ran the community centre there. So he used to look after basically 7 nights a week. They were around the club having a few pints, and Monday was bingo and Tuesday was dancing and Wednesday was whatever else they did back in the 70s. So that was sort of my background. And then I grew up starting work at the age of 12. So I was in the corner shop on a Saturday and Sunday morning at 4 a.m. Stuffing papers. And really, from that point, so from that weekend when I started at the age of 12, I have earned money every week since then. And what the values of working class bring you is it's the value of community, and it's the value of being together, and it's the value of making sure that everybody has a part to play and a role to play within that, and that you are stronger as one group of people. It also, when you grow up in that sort of environment, you have lots of different experiences with people from different backgrounds and people who have different religions and come from different countries and all sorts of different stuff. And a couple of my friends when I grew up were refugees. One was from Syria and one was from Yugoslavia. And actually, for me, I just felt incredibly lucky to have this really tolerant upbringing and having lots of different experiences very early in my life. And even when I went to school, we had severely autistic children in our class that would throw chairs at the teacher and play the trumpet and all sorts of stuff. So for me then, when I encountered neurodiverse people when I was older, it was completely normal. And actually, I was very comfortable in those sort of environments. So very fortunately for me, I think that community-based, working hard, going out and earning money as early as you can to contribute to the family unit, that's how it all started for me. So then I saw my dad was in a factory for 42 years and my mum was in Sainsbury's for 30 years, as well as having a paper round and a cleaner and all sorts of stuff. My mum did loads of stuff, as well as raising 3 kids too. So I saw the power of hard work for low pay, and really that encouraged me early on that working hard was really important, absolutely. But respectfully to my mum and dad, who I love, and I did all this for them really, I didn't want to do what they did. I didn't want to work somewhere for 50 years for low pay and not have any opportunities myself. So that was a real driver for me. I ended up having a relatively disruptive life before the age of 16. So I was getting into all sorts of trouble. I was smoking early, having sex early, drinking early, getting into fights. I nearly got murdered when I was 15, etc. So all those things happened to me quite early. And the other council estate kids from different estates I was hanging around with weren't necessarily the best ones for me to be around. And then when I was 16, I got into sixth form, and sort of all of my mates who had come off the estates, they didn't get into sixth form, so they stayed at home. So now all of a sudden I was with my white middle class mates that all wanted to go to university, and they all had aspirations for good jobs in the future, etc., which just wasn't the background that I'd been from up to the age of 16. I ended up going to university, going on to a graduate scheme in facility services, which is where I started Pareto. And then eventually, yeah, when I was 27, I'd worked for a small provider for about 6 years that had been bought out by a bigger one. Got frustrated at working for a bigger business, and 27 left, set up a business in my bedroom, and then, yeah, went on this magical journey of the last 10 years or so.
It's an amazing story. How did these experiences shape how you viewed stuff like leadership when you were running the company?
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely shaped everything about the culture of the business and leadership in particular. What I'd seen with low wage workers, including my own family, was that they were expected to do everything that the business wanted them to. So, if you were sick, you still went in. If you only had a certain number of holidays, you didn't try and take anything more than that. You only ever did what the man was telling you to do.
Yeah,
So when I started a business up, I wanted to try and make sure that we put people back at the heart of what the business was. And the reason that was important in our sector, we were going up against competitors in workspace services that would say have 50,000 staff, 100,000 staff quite easily. And they didn't treat them particularly well. They didn't always pay them on time. They got their expenses wrong. They would just not be particularly sympathetic to the issues that they had. So for me, what I wanted to do was have a workforce that really we worked for them. It was almost like, how do we turn the job around so that it works for you rather than you working for us? Because I knew we could build loyalty by doing that. And what that meant in reality is when we were around 200 staff, we had a 90% retention rate on our staffing, which was incredible. That the industry
yeah,
average is like 60% in this sector. And the other thing then for me was leadership. So I wanted to build the most diverse team in the sector. And by diversity, I mean a balance of women, ethnic minorities, neurodiversity, drug and alcoholic survivors, suicide survivors, people from the military. I wanted to make sure we had representation from all groups at the senior level. And the reason for doing that was because anyone lower down, if they had any of those protected characteristics and they were vulnerable and insecure about those things, they could look up to the top of the business and they would see those insecurities in the leaders, and they knew that there was nothing blocking them from getting to the top. And the diversity piece was incredibly important to us. And when we went out to the market to try and sell services to these big tech businesses, which we were really successful on, we weren't necessarily selling that we were the best workplace services provider. We were saying we were the best culturally led, values led organization. And if they wanted to, they could take us on a journey and we could go on a journey with them. And you look at early clients we won like Twitter and Deliveroo and ASOS, they were all growing quite quickly themselves at the time that we were working with them early. And we were this very small, agile provider, but they were all values-led businesses. They all understood that we were small and we were going on a journey. So for me, in those 15 people that I took on in the senior leadership team, we had a 0% turnover in 10 years. So literally every single person I hired into that team, and I hand selected all of them, they were there for the whole journey. And in the end, we created a 20% sweet equity pot, which was gifted to the team. And they managed to get about 8 figures for that pot on the exit that we did at the end. So there was a decent amount of money split between them as well. But look, some of those guys that joined me, they joined on 35K, 40K like account management contracts.
incredible.
And then
Yeah,
ended up getting a really decent kicker at the end because they went on this journey. And that's the power of SMEs, I think, as well.
yeah. Well, diversity often gets quite a bad rap in the media. Can you explain what people get wrong about having a diverse workplace?
Yeah, look, for me, regardless of which type of diversity you're talking about, if you have a group of, say, 10 people, if you all look the same, come from the same background, have the same characteristics, you're going to come up with the same solution to a problem. There's no creativity in that. And for me, that was a problem. And also it's about representation. Look, within our sector, 85% of the membership that we have within the membership body are white men. That's just what it is. So that's somewhere to start. So what I wanted to do was to make sure that we had the representation from the right way, but also create creativity, create the opportunity for it to happen. The most important thing you can do from a creative perspective is bring people in who have different aspects of life, different perspectives on life, people that have had different challenges. I don't care if you're rich and you've come from money or if you're poor and you've built everything up yourself. You have a valuable opinion on how different tasks can be completed and how different bits should be approached. So I think culturally, that's what we set. And, we just had such a wonderful relationship with the different communities. So take LGBT plus community, for example, something that I've championed very outwardly, and trans rights and everything that comes with it too is something that I'm very public about. So we were one of the first groups that we organized a march in Pride in London. I was there with a big glitter beard on. I still find glitter some 5 years later in my beard when the whole thing was on. But it wasn't just about changing our logo to a rainbow flag in June. In fact, I found that quite offensive for organizations that did that. It was about delivering real initiatives. And look, you're absolutely right. Diversity and ESG and social initiatives are not for everybody, and they're not for every customer. And with the rollbacks that we've seen in the US from a DEI perspective, we know that this is more of a challenge now. But if you find the right organizations that want to buy that, and we were absolutely the best at it. It wasn't even close. We absolutely were beyond any other competitor that was out there. We delivered 150 of these initiatives in the end. We were able to demonstrate that we were better. And when you work with big tech, generally, I think they take for granted that you can deliver. But actually, they want to find businesses that they want to work with. And they almost see it as like a social value thing themselves, that they've got a great supply chain.
Sure.
Would you say it was that diverse team that led to the insane growth you had? Or was there other factors in there that contributed to the growth?
It's a really good question, and I'll be absolutely honest. The last 10 years has been a blur. It's sometimes hard to sit down and go, what actually happened? We grew 300%, I think, in our year 3, and then we grew another 77% between years 7 and 8. So, we'd have 200 staff one year and then 400 the next year. So, things are just a bit bonkers
Incredible.
as we went through. Absolutely, the ESG story and being a pioneer of environmental, social, and governance initiatives was a fantastic marketing aspect for us to do, because it caught the attention of people for the right reasons. Now, let me just give you some real examples. You don't have to spend loads of money to create great stories for your business. So one story I absolutely love, one of our team members, her daughter played football for the under 11s in Abingdon in Oxfordshire. They couldn't afford their own football kit. So the girls' team had to wear the boys' kit after the boys had worn it without it being washed. So the boys would wear a kit, they play a game, they take it off, they give it to the girls. I was like, this is wrong on so many levels. Nobody wants to wear the sweat of someone else, let alone a 15-year-old boy, 11-year-old boy. So I said, how much is a new kit? And she was like, 300 quid. I was like, great, have 300, stick our logo on the front of it, and then send us a picture of the team stood there in their new kits. So for £300, I now have a story that is about supporting the local community, supporting women in sport, helping young people in fitness and all that sort of stuff. And you can dine out on that story forevermore then, because it doesn't matter how long ago that story was. It's still an amazing thing to do. So that message for us just really worked at the time that we were doing it. And this phrase that I keep saying, ESG, environmental, social, governance, it wasn't really a phrase 10 years ago. And even EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion, wasn't a phrase 10 years ago either. We just did it because it was my community roots and my working class background that led to us to do that. And luckily for us, we were able to create enough of a marketing story that went with what we were doing that really got people on board, but also it was real. It wasn't just about changing these things and, like I said, changing rainbow flags and stuff. And even down to when George Floyd was murdered and we did the Black Lives Matter statement. Pareto was one of the only businesses that had a Black Lives Matter statement. And then in Black History Month in 2022, we wanted to do something real. So we introduced our blood donation policy, where people could take 4 times off a year to go and donate blood. And that's because in the UK, there aren't enough black donors to help us tackle sickle cell disease. So people die of sickle cell disease because there isn't enough black blood to support that community group that need it. And I've now gone on to be one of the biggest blood donors in the world. I donate every couple of weeks now. I've saved something like 1,000 lives in my time. I'm coming up to my 100th donation just after Christmas. So these things are real, and these things are that we could actually tell people about. And it wasn't just marketing bullshit. It was real. And then when you went to customers and said, hey, do you want to come and do some of this stuff with us? Like plant a wild garden in a school or make some honey or whatever it was that we were doing. They were like, yeah, that sounds really cool, actually. Let's do it. But you need to find the right customers. Not everybody is up for that.
We like going back to step one on this podcast. So you were in your bedroom.
Okay.
What was the very
Yeah.
first thing you did after you had the idea to start a company?
Well, yeah, on the first day, and I'm pretty disappointed in myself. I had a lay-in actually. So, like, my wife had gone to work. I was in I lived in this. My first house was like this tiny Victorian cottage, which was like a barn conversion, where the door was about this high. So I kept banging my head. So yeah, I think about 10 o'clock in the morning, I woke up on that day. That was the final lie-in I had for 10 years, by the way. After that, and then I was sat there in my pants, literally, hadn't even had a shower, with the laptop there, going, crikey, what am I actually going to do now? Now, look, the reason that I was able to grow a business so quickly, and again, this is good advice, for the previous 6 years, I've been networking my ass off, right? On someone else's money and someone else's time. I'd been going to every event I could. I'd been writing articles in the press. I'd been going for awards, which I'd won a couple at that stage. I'd been basically just networking. Anywhere that there was a workspace services networking event, I was there. So people knew who I was. And this was like early personal brand stuff. So when I set up and I was in the room, and literally day one, I had a list of probably 3 or 4 people that I knew I could ring to say, hey, I've started this business. I'd love to have a chat with you to see whether or not we could have a conversation about delivering services to you. Now, there was no guarantee at that stage that anyone was going to say yes, but that was the risk that I took. It just so happened, and this is, call it lucky, call it whatever you like. On that very afternoon that I started, I'd worked with a guy called Mark in a previous business. He was the director of property at that business. He'd just left that organization that I'd worked with him at before. He went to the CFO of that organization and said, look, you need some help. What? Because I'm leaving immediately. You should go and chat to Andrew and let him come in and as a consultant, just to help you get started, basically, to start transferring through the different services that we needed for property. So that very afternoon, I did finally have a shower, and I went into London, and I went and met Dominique, who was the CFO there, and I discussed what I was doing and how I could help them. And I sold their consultancy services that afternoon. So what that meant was 5 half days a week, I was in an office in London, in Waterloo, delivering these consultancy services. So they were paying for my travel and they were paying for my time. So that was a great start. But then it meant in the afternoon, I could do everything else. So basically then I almost on an immediate basis, I had an office to work from. I had an address I could meet people at in London, in Waterloo, which was great. And I had the afternoons free, and someone else had paid for me to be in London that day. And then I could go and do my sales meetings and do more networking stuff and then start meeting people. The very first call I made was to a guy called Jeff at Bulgari Hotel, which I've spoken about online a little bit as well. And the famous story with Jeff was I called him on day one. He was my banker. And I thought, yeah, he's definitely going to say yes. And I called him and he said, sorry, I've just taken 4 weeks off to do my kitchen. You'll have to call me back in a month's time. And your heart drops a little bit because you're like, oh, was this all a big mistake? How am I going to pay my mortgage this month? My wife is really concerned about the finances, as she was right to be at that stage. So yeah, that's literally the day one scenario. So I called Jeff and got a no, you need to call me back in 4 weeks. And I had the conversation in London with Dominique. And literally from that moment, which was the afternoon that I started, we never stopped. And then just the growth just went big from there.
Yeah. Did you spend any time validating the idea before you started reaching out to customers? So how did you know this was in demand and that people needed your services?
Yeah, no one's ever asked me that question. That's actually a good question. I'll tell you what's great. And again, I think this is also good advice. With what we do in workplace services, customers have to choose a provider to deliver services to them because it's a statutory compliant need. So they don't have a choice whether they buy it or not. They have to buy it. So that's
All right,
number
so it's
one.
genius model. Yeah.
There's a market for it, right?
Yeah.
You have to do it. And actually, look, I'll just briefly go on to that. But investors also love that because investors know that the demand for services shouldn't drop because it's a statutory compliance thing that still is needed in the future. So if anybody's thinking about how do I go to a business or how do I start a business where I definitely know I'm going to get some income, well, maybe have a look at compliance-based things that customers have to do rather than want to do. And that was a big deal for me. Yeah, so from a validation perspective, it was about, I knew that customers had to buy these services. Now, that didn't mean they were going to buy them from me, but it meant I knew that there was a market there. And having done work on the Institute of Workplace, where I volunteered for a long time as well, and I'm chair of today, I knew that this sector was about £100 billion turnover per annum in the UK, delivered what we did. So I knew it was a market that existed and that people had to buy and that there were loads of service providers in it. Now, did I back myself against 123,999 other businesses? Yes, absolutely, because that's the egotistical entrepreneur I am, and I knew I could go and do it. But yeah, so that answer isn't so easy for all businesses, because if you're selling something that is a want rather than a need, then it's not always that easy to carve out your own little niche. But for me, all I needed was a 50 million pound niche in a 100 billion pound sector. So it shouldn't be that hard to do, should it? It's just battling against all the other providers that are there as well. And by the way, when I was competing, the people I was going up against were genuinely 300 times our size. So take a CBRE that's like a 10 billion turnover organization, and you got little old Pareto that was 25 million turnover at the time we were competing. You really had to convince customers that you were the right choice for them. And ultimately, you weren't going to fuck it up by them choosing you, which was a really important one.
A lot of pressure.
And for us, no, and we had the stats to back it up, because we had like a 90% client retention rate as well as staff retention. So we knew that customers enjoyed what we did, and that was a great thing for us to be able to tell new customers. We also, there's something called Net Promoter Score. So if anyone does any NPS stuff, and Pareto's externally validated Net Promoter Score, the first one was like 64 or something. And we were told from research the industry average was minus 58. So our score was like plus 60. The industry average was minus 58. Now, if that doesn't tell you everything about my business, I don't know what would, because then when you go into a customer and they say, well, how do you know that you're good at this? How is this not a risk for us? And you're like, well, do you want to go with a minus 58 or do you want to go with a plus 60? And, you can start to validate yourself a little bit more. But you can only do that once you obviously have some case studies and you have some clients and you move it forward from there.
It's really interesting about compliance. Sorry. It's really interesting about compliance-based businesses, because the other week we had someone on, didn't we, Harrison, who does waste management. And that is a service that a business can't do without. So the rates of success are just a lot higher than, I'm guilty of this. You always want to try and make like the new music gadget that no one actually needs, when you should actually just look at something that businesses have to pay on.
And look, let's be honest. Someone would go, running a waste business, that doesn't sound very sexy, or even property services. People don't want to go to a party and tell people that they run a waste business where they empty bins. You can make a load of money emptying bins, because you need to do. And there's a company called Any Junk that was founded by a guy, I think his name was Jason, who I met a few years ago. In the end, he used to have all these lorries going around himself. It was his own staff and his own lorries. He just outsourced the whole thing. He just became a platform where he hired local contractors to go and empty all the rubbish out of people's locations. And it was like up to £300 per time. But his model almost became like an Uber model in the end. So he didn't hire anybody and he didn't have any vans. He just was the central place where you would go to book your waste removal, and then someone else would do it and he'd just make a cut on the top. He was making about 20% EBITDA, which anybody running a business, 20% EBITDA is really amazing on that stuff, especially for something that people have to buy. And the compliance piece. So again, advice, don't be like, you're right. It's nice to come up with this idea that you're going to make an app that you're going to sell for £1 billion one day, but that doesn't necessarily happen very often. That's why they're called unicorns, because you don't come across them too often. But if you have a look at something people have to buy, you have a market, and that's a great place to start.
Sure.
Yeah. Now, you've talked to us about getting that first client. How did you get the second one and the third one? How did that actually kick off?
Yeah. I love your questions, guys. These are great, by the way. Look, my first client was Jeff at Bulgari. So he came back from decorating his kitchen, and luckily he said yes. And we won a couple of £100,000 contract with them. Now, look, now I have a story, and this is great advice for salespeople. You only need the smallest amount of truth to then go and sell something into the future. So I had Bulgari, which was say 200K, and I had my consultancy, which was maybe, 50K a year, whatever. So all of a sudden now I'm a £1 million business. No one can see my accounts. No one can see, because I'm on a micro accounts anyway, and it's going to be 18 months before I submit them. So on those two now, fantastic news. Anytime I'm talking to a customer, I'm already a £1 million business. And, you need to be careful and don't say lies, but you just need to extrapolate the truth as much as possible. The second one was Yahoo. Yahoo actually came to us. So
Wow.
they had heard that we'd started up. I'd worked with them previously, so they knew who I was. I'd networked well. The chap who was there actually lived in Oxfordshire, so we were close to each other as well, which was just lucky. And so, yeah, they called us and said, hey, heard you started up, heard you're delivering to Bulgaria and that you're in London doing this stuff. Do you want to have a chat? We're like, yeah, absolutely. Like, let's go and do it. And they were another company that was a bit frustrated with the bigger service providers in the sector. They weren't getting the service that they needed. I had a good reputation and a good relationship. So we converted that one almost immediately afterwards. So that was great. So now I've got this original American business. I've got Bulgari and I've got Yahoo. You see the story is starting to grow now from here.
Yeah.
And then the third one, I'm pretty sure it may have been the fourth, but the third one was Twitter. So Twitter had heard about us within the market, and Twitter was only a small contract. So it was like 25 grand a year contract, but it was just like the most amazing brand. And I'm talking 2017 Twitter, when it wasn't all under Musk and he wasn't sleeping in the office and all that sort of stuff that ended up happening. So I remember, and the guys at Twitter play a really important role in Pareto, and I love them with all my heart. We go there to do a presentation. It's meant to be an hour, and we're in there for 3 hours. And 2 hours, we talk about dogs. And so I came out of that, and I was like, if we haven't won that contract, I don't know what would win it. No, what is going to win it? And I'll come on to donuts a little bit later. But so like literally for us, I came out, and then Twitter said yes. Now, at the time, Twitter was one of the most secretive and successful organizations in the world. And then we very quickly afterwards, we won Candy Crush because I knew someone that had gone to Candy Crush, and they gave us an opportunity to tender for their services as well. So look, 4 clients in now: Bulgari, the American business, Candy Crush, Twitter. You see how this story starts to build. Now, Twitter was only a 25 grand a year contract, but of course, extrapolating the truth, you try and make that a much bigger contract. And then you say to new customers, hey, do you want to come and see Twitter's offices? Because it's impossible to get in here unless you're actually a partner. And by the way, they've got everything is free. So all the food is free. They have a library. They have a bar upstairs, a hidden bar where you can drink for free all day, but you're not allowed to take your phone or your laptop in there. There's a yoga studio. There's like an amazing breakout space. There's the best coffee machine that you've ever seen in an office that comes out of a tap instead of a machine. You start to tell these stories and people are like, wow. So we want to learn from Twitter's workplace because we want to deliver a better workplace ourselves. And Pareto, you now know what exceptionally good looks like, so you can come and teach us what good looks like as well. And then you start to sort of build the story up from there. And then the big one, just to go on to the next part, the big one was then London Zoo and Whipsnade Zoo. So Pareto had got to about 1 million turnover roughly, and London and Whipsnade Zoo had previously outsourced for the first time in 200 years, and it hadn't gone particularly well. They'd gone to a large provider. When I was in my earlier career, I managed a woman called Jane, and Jane had gone on to the zoo to be the head of their property services there. It's 700 acres and 20,000 animals in these zoos, by the way. So it's a big fish. That's a good pun, actually. So then we're about 1 million turnover. They were in some trouble because the service they were getting was appallingly bad. Their compliance was under stress, and they were spending a lot of money on reactive additional works. So they needed help. Now, Jane came to us and said, look, I know it's early. I know you're small, but we want to work together. And we went and presented to the board of trustees, and we laid it all out on the table. Everything was honest. We're like, here's who we are. Here's where we are. This is what we will do for you. It was a 2.3 million pounds a year contract. We were a 1 million pound business at the time. And we convinced them that we were the right partner for them. And they said yes. So overnight, I literally mean it, we went from like 1 million to 3.5 million in one go, plus all the projects and stuff that came on top of it. And we now had one of the most iconic public attractions in the world that everybody has heard of, London Zoo, doesn't matter who they are. And it was also just one of the most special relationships and contracts. And when you're now dealing with literal gorillas and lions and tigers and everything, it just adds an extra dimension of risk and challenge to everything too. So, yes, they said yes. And then like now we have 5 contracts and we have some of the biggest brands in the world, and we're still only a couple of years old at this stage. So we're absolutely smashing it from the very beginning. And then you start to build momentum and you tell the story and you keep growing. as you can see, I love to talk and I'm a great storyteller. And I was able to tell customers this story and bring them on the journey. And London Zoo, even today, is still a customer. There's just had a big renewal go through for Pareto now. And it's an amazing relationship and one that we are so grateful for, because without them, actually, we wouldn't have been able to kickstart exactly like we did.
How did you feel that night that you won that contract with London Zoo, going to bed? What was that feeling like?
I'm very honest. It was more doom than anything because, like, we probably had, I don't know, maybe 30 people in the business at that stage, and this contract came with about 30 more. So we were doubling because you transfer the staff over when you change service providers in this sort of environment. I never stopped to celebrate success in our business. Never. I was always about what's next, what's next, what's next. I was relentless to a fault. I would never celebrate and stop. So that night, when you deliver the sales and you deliver the ops, which I did for a good chunk of the business, winning is amazing, but immediately you get the yes. You're like, okay, oh dear,
what's next?
How are we going to do this? But also, I'm going to have to work really hard now to make this a success because I made a load of promises. But also, integrity is like the main aspect about me is my integrity. If you cut me in half, you will see that integrity runs through everything. I'm always honest with people, and I'm always will do what I say I'm going to do. So if I say I'm going to take on your £2 million a year contract and personally make it work, then that's what I'm going to do. But it just means that you have to work harder, longer hours, spending lots of time with the team and just delivering it. And that's what I was willing to do. But, I talk about sacrifice a lot, but that's when you start to sacrifice things now because you're getting up earlier, you're getting home later, and you're making decisions based on what's best for the business as opposed to what's best for you.
Yeah, building on that, like what actually is the reality of being an entrepreneur that is scaling a company super quickly? Because obviously being an entrepreneur, it's very, you look at it through rose-tinted glasses on social media, but what's the actual reality?
Yeah, look, I am someone who is unbalanced, and I have an unpopular opinion that I think if you really want a business to fly, I think there is a period in your life where you need to be unbalanced and you need to make sacrifices and you need to make choices that are best for the business as opposed to what's happening in your personal life. The reality is I didn't see my wife enough. I wasn't at home enough. When my kids were born, I think I had like 2 or 3 days off and then I went straight back to work. When my daughter was originally here, I would come home at like 6:45, see her for 10 minutes, give her a bath, hand her back to my wife. My wife would put her to bed, and then I'd carry on working. I lost touch with a lot of my friends because my friends who all lived in London now, they were like, hey, Hulbert, come out on Friday and have a drink. I'm like, I can't. I'm doing this, or I need to write a report, or I can't be hungover on Saturday because I'm working on this, this, and this, because I used to write a lot of tenders and things on the weekend. So the real reality is, I gave myself to the organization for about 10 years, 9 or 10 years. Now, I knew what I was doing, and I felt that a big outcome was coming for me, and I felt that I should be doing it because I had this chip on my shoulder that I could grow this business and sell it for a decent amount of money one day, and that I could retire before I was 40. I finished when I was 37, so I luckily managed to get there. I wasn't driven by money. I was driven by this idea that money would give me my time back, and then I could go back and try and repair all the relationships. And like I mentioned at the top, the last 2 years that since I've been retired, I'm 39 now, I've been spending time rebuilding relationships with my wife and my kids and my friends and just all those wonderful things that I have the privilege of being able to do now. So for me, entrepreneurship isn't easy. Now, not everybody goes on the route that I did, okay? So not everybody has to go down this route that I did, but for me, that is one of the ways that you can really make it a success and kickstart things and just accelerate growth. And I am not saying burn yourself out. You need to know where your limits are. But I am saying if it's a Saturday night and on Sunday you've got a really important proposal to write for a new customer that's going to change the shape of your business, do not go out on Saturday night and get really pissed and get in late and eat a kebab and feel like shit the next day and have KFC for breakfast. Focus on what you are doing the next day because otherwise your business journey may take a lot longer. So I was accepting that my 9 years of sacrifice was going to be okay. The one lucky thing for me was I kept my marriage together. And it wasn't always easy. I don't pretend that it was. Many, many entrepreneurs lose their partners through starting a business, men or women. And actually, I think that's something that I was able to hold on to, but only because my wife is remarkable. She's incredibly tolerant, and she knew that I was trying to do something bigger. It doesn't mean she was happy all the time, because we had lots of arguments, and there were times when she would challenge me and say, look, Andrew, I need you here. And I'd be saying, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be there. I'm going to do this instead. And that wasn't always easy, but it worked out for me. It doesn't work out for everybody.
Yeah. So those are some of the challenges in your personal life. What were some of the challenges actually running the business? Like in this particular industry, what's the main challenge that you face?
Yeah, the main challenge is people. So you need to find good people. As you grow, there are less and less good people for what you're trying to deliver. So if I just take engineers, for example, so we hired loads of electrical guys, mechanical guys, mainly men, because that's how the industry was made up of those. We needed to find engineers that not only were great engineers, but also they could go and work in somewhere like Twitter, which had a very sort of modern culture and a young culture. And they couldn't be saying the wrong things or making bad jokes or, you know, all the sort of stuff that typically engineers can be considered that that's how they will act. So the team that we had at, say, London Zoo could never have worked within the modern environments that we had, because the banter, if you like, was just not going to be working in that environment. And when you go and work in these real successful, profitable, high-tech businesses, their culture is really important to them. And if you get it wrong, then people just get fired. I mean, it's really as simple as that. Get it wrong and you're gone. So you have to find the right people. So the biggest challenge was finding people, mainly on operational level, as we got bigger, that were going to buy into the Pareto vision. What I didn't struggle with was finding my 15 leaders, because I was able to go out and individually interview them, get to know them. And like I say, I talk about this a lot, but for me, food and community, going back to my upbringing, that is how you connect with people in a much more like relevant, viable, authentic way. So I would go out and have a coffee, or I'd go and have a burger, or I'd go and have breakfast just to get to know people. Because I'm saying to them, look, if you're going to come on this journey with us and hopefully you make a few £100,000 at the end of it, then I need to know, what are you sacrificing? Why are you going to come to me? When I call you on a Saturday and say the gorillas got out of the cage in the zoo, what are you going to be doing that you're going to have to stop so that you can deal with all that shit that's going on? Yeah. And that's the reality of it. So I was very, very good at turning the whole situation round, seeing it through the eyes of the employee, certainly at leadership level, and saying, why does this work for you? And anyone that starts a business that scales, finding great people. Absolutely do not hire the wrong person just because they're available now. Work harder to find the right person and understand it may take you longer to get there. And I used to have a friend called Olu when I was growing up, and he used to say he was looking for Mrs. Right, not Mrs. Right now. That's what he used to say. And I think that's the same in recruitment. Yeah. Look for Mr. Right, not Mr. Right now. And that's a really important place to start.
I like that.
Yeah, entrepreneurs see that on their wall. It's like, yes. Yeah.
Olu did find his Mrs. Right in the end, and he went on to marry a beautiful woman, has a couple of kids now, and yeah, he's really successful. Gospel singer.
I've got one more question about actually building the business. So I'm often quite interested. You hear that you're supposed to work on the business, not in the business, which I'm not really sure how that works when you're building it in the early stages. But what was your relationship between working in the business or actually on the business?
Yeah. I also agree with you. I hear this all the time. And I think young new starter entrepreneurs keep saying they want to work on it, not in it. Again, maybe unpopular opinion, I think for the first few years, you need to be in it because you're the one that's got the drive. You're the special one. You're the one that has the intelligence, the thought process. You're building systems and processes for the future, and only you can do that. It's such an important time. It's like bringing up a child. Those first few years, it really matters the relationship that you have with them. And then as they get older and they don't need you as much, then you can start to step out and work on the business. Now, I didn't work on the business probably until about 8 years in. So we got 8 years in. We were maybe 40 million turnover, that sort of level. And then we knew that we were going to go to an exit point where we'd have private equity investment at the end, which is when we got to this $100 million situation. So that is when we went out and hired a new C-suite team that was going to take the business from where it was to an exit point. Because from investors' perspective, what they don't like is turning up. There's a founder that's still running everything, and the founder's saying, well, I want to go. And the investors are saying, well, I'll give you, dozens of millions of pounds, but you need to stay because it's too much of a risk if you leave the business. So I don't have a popular opinion. I don't agree with what most of the podcasts say on this. I think you work in the business until you are ready to take a step out and maybe look at a proper exit for yourself. But the key then is hire people that are almost as good as you, because no one's as good as you are, because you're the entrepreneur and the founder, and believe whatever you like. But you need to make sure you have a brilliant team that when the new investors come in, they are comfortable, confident, and happy that that team is going to take the business forward without you in it. After I stepped back from being CEO, I then became a non-exec and vice chair for the business. And my role really became about an ambassadorial, like, networking role. So I just went back out there just to make sure that everyone could hear the story. They knew how successful Pareto was and what we were trying to do. I worked on trying to raise investment. I worked on M&A activity. So we bought a business just before we sold and bought one afterwards as well. So, yeah, that was when it changed for me. But work. No one is going to do it as well as you. Certainly not from the very beginning. Put your ass into it and just get on with it and stop listening to all of the people online telling you not to work that hard on it. That's
good to hear a different narrative, because you always hear on LinkedIn, you've got to work on the business. But how can you work on the business if you don't know every in and out of actually working inside the business?
Well, you need to build it first. You can't. Look, if you're a multimillionaire and you're just investing in stuff, that's a different story. But if you're starting in a bedroom with nothing and no money, then you're going to have to do everything yourself. And if you're ever in a privileged enough position to take a step back and bring other people in, that's fantastic news. But you need to get there first. What you don't want, and this is, look, 80% of new businesses fail, by the way. So let's not forget that. Starting a business isn't an easy thing. If you are like a year in and you think, I've been working too hard on this, I'm going to take a step back and work on the business rather than in the business, I actually think that's a recipe for failure. I think you need to work until it's in a really good size relative to the market that you're in, and then step back only when the time is right. But don't try and get there too early. This is what I mean about sacrifice. Give yourself 5 years that you're just going to throw yourself into this and you're going to say no to the other things that you want to do and see what happens. And then give yourself the good chance. But like I said, 4 and 5 times it fails. So you just need to have that backup plan. And again, just another piece of advice. When I was starting up, I was always confident that I would go and start this business. And if it didn't work out, I would just go and get a job in the workplace sector like I did before. And I'd have learned so much in the couple of years that I was trying to run the business. Luckily for me, it worked out. But I had absolute confidence that I'd go and get $100,000 a year role as a director in a big business if it all failed. And if I lost my house and my marriage and all my relationships and I had to go back to my mum's house and start all over again, I was willing to do that. That was what was on the line for me. But luckily it worked out and I didn't have to go and work for one of the big corporates and hate my life for the rest of eternity. So,
Well,
we like to end every episode in a similar sort of way. So if you had to give one line of advice to your 20-year-old self, what would you tell him?
Don't let the bastards grind you down. That is a piece of advice I was given when I was 14 by my business studies teacher in when I was doing it in GCSE level or whatever it was. There are a lot of people out there that are negative. There are a lot of people out there that are going to try and stop you doing what you're doing. Let me just go back to me for a second. There are 120,000 service providers doing what we did. Can you imagine how they felt when I turned up and we were winning all the time and I was on every tender? And what I did is I always brought donuts with me. So often we do like big walkarounds as different contractors in client buildings so that we could tender for the work. So I always turned up. I'd bring donuts with the client's logo on and I'd share the donuts out with everybody. And everyone would be like secretly writing on their pads and whispering to each other. And I'd be there with my rainbow laces going, hey guys, Andrew's back again. How's it going? John, saw you last time. Chris, how's it going? Back again, are we? And then I'd like have the donuts there. Now, look, the reason I did that was because the customers could see how we interacted and that they could see that we were a real positive force. But believe me, we upset a lot of different a lot of different contractors because they didn't like us. And obviously I was a big character and I was just pissing a load of people off. But that just gave me so much fuel, by the way, to keep going, because then you do it twice as big next time. You bring twice as many donuts. So now they can have one to eat and one to take home for their wife and all that sort of stuff that goes through. So yeah, look, don't let the bastards grind you down. And again, like when I said I was starting a business, some people I spoke to and some of my friends even were like, well, that's a big risk. You know, I'm not sure that's going to work out. What about your mortgage? What about your wife? And my mum was cautious about it, and I take counsel from my mum an awful lot because she's such an important person in my life. My dad was like, yeah, just get on with it, Andrew. You're going to do whatever you're going to do anyway. And so like those conversations, you just have to understand why you're doing it, what you're putting at risk and what's going on. And again, you'll see me talk a lot, but I talk about the soul. I'm not spiritual, but those conversations that you have in here with yourself, trying to understand yourself, are such important conversations to have. And, just that internal monologue around what is going on in your head. But there were two people who said, Andrew, you should go for it. I know it's going to be a success. My friend Jimmy and my friend Claudia. I remember telling them both, and they're like, yeah, it's going to work. Like, you should absolutely go for it. And the power I took from those two people saying that they believed that it was going to work was so much more powerful than the negatives that I was taking from those that said it couldn't be done. And the other just little bit of advice, people are often, honestly, I think people are often jealous about entrepreneurs who are leaving the business because you sort of leave. There's a book called The Escape Manifesto, and they talk about this. When you tell people you're leaving to start your business and they're still working in the corporate, there's a little bit like, oh, how the fuck, how do you get to leave this place that I hate and you're the one that's going to go and start a business and be a success? There can be some negativity in that relationship. So like, you just have to make sure you understand that that's coming and that that negativity is going to happen. It happened to me. I told one of the colleagues that I was leaving, and he took me out for a coffee, and he goes, oh, I started my own business once and I only grew it to 6 million and then it went bust. You're never going to get past that level. I'm way more experienced than you were when I was doing it. He was saying this to me face to face over a coffee. And as well as lots of other nasty things as well. I'm like, you dickhead. What are you actually doing
what
in
are
this
you
scenario?
offering? Yeah.
What's the point? I know you have a hang up that you were not successful in business. Don't try and implant that onto me. That's not my problem. And actually, like, I went on to mentor dozens of people in the end, up to sort of the 100 sort of range of people I was mentoring, because I was trying to help other people with positivity. But yeah, just be prepared for the negatives because they will be there. And don't let the bastards grind you down. Mr. Bray, when I was 14, going right back to that moment, that is what I should have written on the wall. What we did write on the wall was, we don't employ dickheads. That was our phrase that we used to have, which, as I say, we sort of stole from Deliveroo, because Deliveroo on their wall, it used to say, give a shit. That was their slogan internally, give a shit. And ours was, we don't employ dickheads. And look, we did employ a few dickheads, but we also fired them. So that was the right way to
If I had met you at 15, would I have seen the entrepreneur that you'd have later become?
Yeah, most likely, because I'd have been selling you a bike that I'd stolen and spray painted a different color, and I would have been making 100% profit on the stolen bikes. So yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. And the final question would be one book or podcast that you'd recommend to a listener.
I really love the Venture Room podcast. So these are the guys that go out and do street interviews. I was lucky enough to do it with them. They speak to some really authentic entrepreneurs who are very real and give very practical advice. I was very lucky to work with them and do a shoot with them as well. And there's a bit more coming up with those two guys also. So yeah, go and check out the Venture Room. Great guys, really genuine, just out there trying to get real business advice and share it with their community. They're brilliant people.
Andrew, thanks so much for coming on.